Hey everybody, welcome to another On This Day in Canadian Military History live stream. Today we're taking a nautical turn, which I am looking forward to because I've been trying to do more nautical history generally, and especially on the channel and all the stuff I do. Definitely wanted to be getting a little bit more on the water. So I'm really excited that we're getting to have this today. So today we're going to be talking about women in the Royal Canadian Navy. We'll start with how that comes about and then go more generally and kind of go with kind of the story that develops. And of course, questions are always welcome. Please ask them at any time. There's no real, we're not going to wait for them for this one. Just fire away. You got questions, fire away. And now I will send them to our guest today, Roger, who was in the Navy and know tons about this stuff. But he'll speak about that a little bit, and then we'll get going. So I'm looking forward to this one. And again, every time we have a live stream, always looking forward to the sidebar and everyone participating. So I do want to say thank you for everyone coming out to watch and participate. It's one of the things I enjoy the most about doing this. So thanks again, everybody. Hey, Roger, how's it going?
Very good, Brad. Yourself?
Oh, not bad. Busy day, but I made it here and just under the wire. So
Perfect.
So it's all good. Good to hear. It's a bit cold here, so I'm still recovering from that as well. So
yeah, cold where we are too. Been avoiding going outside except to shovel snow.
Yeah, I didn't have a choice today, so you bundle up and hope for the best. But yeah, so it's good. So, like I said, we were talking about before. I'm the naval background and do all this naval work. I just wondering. We've talked about it a little bit, you and me, on different times and that, but just kind of the Navy stuff. How'd you get here? What interested you in doing the Navy thing and all that?
Well, I've always had I've always been a history buff, even when I was a kid. History has always been a fascinating subject. You know, there's just so much to discover about what has happened. And the passion for naval history really came when I was in my teens and was a sea cadet with RCSCC Warship in Kitchener. And, you know, a lot during the Remembrance Day services and Battle of Atlantic. Afterwards, you know, after the Remembrance Parade, we'd be at the Naval Association for the lunch and reception. And you know, you're listening to these vets, and this is the early 70s, right?
Right.
Or sorry, mid 70s, and you know, and they'd be talking to each other, and you listen, you know, and you hear the discussion, and it clicked. Okay, they're talking about D-Day. I've never heard those stories in school.
Yeah,
this is much more interesting, and it blossomed from there, and so, you know, that started a real interest in Canadian naval history. And as a teenager, you know, of course, try to find more information on it. And at the library in Kitchener, I was only able to find one book. And that was by Ken McPherson, wonderful author and friend and mentor since then. But his book, Canada's Fighting Ships, was the only book I could get my hands on.
Yeah.
And so then it was a real, you know, wanting to learn more. Through cadets, I went on to join the CIC and became an officer through the system there. Did several summer callouts. Did one deployment with HMCS Ottawa, Carabops in 1981. And got out of the CIC when it was time for me to work on my career as a paramedic, but later returned to working in the cadet system back in the 90s, and then working with the Navy League cadet program, and eventually becoming area officer for Eastern Ontario with 7 corps under my belt. So it's definitely been interesting, to say the least.
For sure. Yeah, you've got a varied background, so that interesting fits very well, I think.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. So.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, just, you know, wanting to discover more has led to, you know, the search, really. And
yeah, I get what you mean by just that word. Yep.
Yeah. The real trigger for me was when I was commanding officer of a cadet corps named Trentonian here in Trenton. It was a brand new corps and named after the Corvette that represented the city. And I wanted to teach the cadets more about their namesake. And going through the naval history books, basically I found 3 paragraphs. Built in Kingston, took part in Normandy. Some mention the accidental attack by the Americans, and then torpedoed and sunk on the 22nd of February. And that was all. So then I started, okay, well, there was 96 sailors that survived the sinking. Let's find one to be the reviewing officer here for the Corps, and the cadets can actually meet them. It took several years to find one. I had found several, unfortunately, through obituaries. And finally found a gentleman by the name of Bruce Keir. He was a stoker living in Scarborough. And he was in Trentonian, transferred to the ship literally within a week of its commissioning, and remained with the ship until he stepped off the deck into the water on February 22nd, 1945. And so I had him come up here to Trenton, spent the afternoon during the inspection, but it's a busy day all the way around, so didn't have a lot of time to talk to him. But in the little bit of time that we did, again, he passed on incredible stories. And so made an arrangement to meet with him at his home at another date where we could actually sit down and just focus on a conversation. And it basically started off with, I was there, but, it was going on 60 plus years ago. And, I don't really know what I can tell you. And I said, well, I'm not interested in dates and times. I can get those elsewhere. I just want to know, what were your shipmates like? What was your mess like? What was convoy duty like? What was the food like? And 4 hours later, he stopped talking. He says, I don't know if I was really able to tell you anything.
Yeah, that's how that goes.
So, but then he says, I want to show you something. And he takes me down to his rec room, and he reaches up, grabs a scrapbook off the shelf. And I'm thinking, awesome. Maybe, I'll find some, letters if I'm really, really lucky that he sent home. Right. Maybe some newspaper clippings that his family saved, and he opens it up, and it's all these 2x3 black and white photos. And he says, our tiffy on board the ship, and a tiffy is the slang for the ship's medic. He says, our tiffy was an avid photographer, and he didn't have anything to do unless somebody got sick or hurt. So he would take pictures of everything that was going on in the ship. And then in his sick bay, he would develop them and print them. He would post them up on the bulletin board, and we could sign up for whatever prints we wanted. And he would charge us a couple of cents a piece. Yeah. And he said that went to pay for his film and his chemicals and his paper. And he had 180 of these photos.
Wow.
All of Trentonian, virtually from Quebec City when she was coming out of the Great Lakes after commissioning to 2 weeks before the ship was torpedoed. And it showed time in Halifax, showed time in Quebec City, time in Halifax, convoys on the North Atlantic, working up evolutions off Bermuda, trips into St. John's Harbor in Newfoundland, over to England with leave in the UK. The Normandy photos were just phenomenal. A whole series of photos of the invasion, not from the land where we normally see it, but from the water where we don't normally see it. The accident or friendly fire incident with the American destroyer, he had photos of all of that.
Wow.
And these aren't your official Navy photos either.
No.
These are very personal photos that you and I would take when we go away somewhere, right?
Yep. Oh yeah.
And that just grew from there, and that started a whole new project for me other than writing.
Yeah.
So, but that was the basis of my creation of the book, White Ensign Flying, the story of HMCS Trentonian. Yeah.
And you've basically been going since then, pretty much.
And going since then, yeah.
Never doing everything that you do. Well, we got some quick questions. One, and then we'll get moving to the topic at hand. But I have a guess, but how did the photos survive the sinking? I guess because some of them would have been shipped out with the mail. Or there's a story behind it, as these things tend to happen.
Yeah, well, that's actually, I see it's from Norma.
Yeah, Norma.
Really great question, Norma. Because unfortunately, the Tiffy, his name was Alan Singleton, and all his negatives went down with the ship.
Oh.
And for Bruce Keir, all his photos had also gone down with the ship. But when they made it to shore, they were eventually transferred to the Naval Manning Depot, HMCS Niobe in Scotland. And when Bruce got to Scotland, he ran into one of his shipmates that had been transferred off Trentonian 2 weeks before she was torpedoed. And in the conversation, right away, I hear you guys were sunk. How is everybody, and who's hurt, who didn't make it, and all that stuff. And then eventually the conversation turned to, well, you're on survivor's leave right now. And Bruce says, yeah. He says, and you got your survivor's pay, didn't you? And he's, yeah. He says, well, I'm really down on my luck. Can you loan me some money? and Bruce basically said to him, okay, but I want some collateral.
Yeah.
And the guy said, well, I've got my photos. Bruce said, sure, I'll take them until you pay me back.
He never paid him back.
The guy never paid me back.
Amazing.
So, yeah. So
Amazing.
For a little bit of gambling and a little bit of fate, the photos survived.
Where are they now?
Eventually, I managed to collect over 300 photos from other survivors as well.
Do you have copies on your website?
Yeah, they're all on my website. They're part of the collection that I use for the my on this photo of the day posts.
Yep.
And we'll talk about that too, the photo collection as well.
Yeah. Just we got to keep on task because I know you and me can chat about this stuff forever. So, but that's for everybody. There's your bonus story to kick off the night, everybody. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's great. So if you don't mind, we can get going to the topic at hand tonight and the first women in the Royal Canadian Navy, if you don't mind, Roger.
Yeah.
So you prepared a slideshow like I do. So I'll pull that up, and then you can just start in. And then, of course, if there's questions and all that stuff, everyone fire away, and we'll do our best.
There we go. Okay, so with this slide, this is what I was talking about, the private photos, the personal photos by our veterans.
Yeah.
This is an official RCN photo taken during the Second World War. And, it's quite good. It's nice and clear. The ship is nice and clean. 3 RCN sailors, brooms in hand, in their best bib and tucker. And now we'll show you the difference between an official photo and a photo that a sailor takes. If you go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So
just a little different.
This is cleaning stations on board HMCS Trentonian. And there's a big difference there. So if you go to the next slide, we can compare the two.
Got to point out the Leafs jersey, of course, as Canadians always do. There's always a jersey somewhere. Always. So
if you go to the next slide, there we go. So now you can see these gentlemen a little bit better. And the one's wearing, it's either an RCN jersey from the time or a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey. I can't
It's a
really
Leafs.
tell.
Unfortunately, it's a Leafs jersey. Unfortunately,
but this is the difference between the veterans photos, and what I've done since that first 180 photos from Trentonian is every time I meet up with a veteran, if they have photos and they're willing to contribute, I take their personal photos, scan them at a very high resolution so that they can be used for printing. And then I return the original photos and a copy of the scans to the veteran or the family that's donated them. And then I tag these so that they can be searched and utilized, and give them a caption when possible with the ship's name, the location, people, if I have their names. And then I use them for my own research. I use them for my morning post every day for the photo of the day. And but I also have distributed this digital collection to all the different naval museums across Canada. So Halifax, Sackville, Shearwater, Quebec City, Winnipeg, Calgary, Esquimalt, all have copies of these digital scans.
That's great.
Along with the Directorate of History and Heritage for the RCN and the Canadian War Museum. So any researcher can use these photos when they're working, and they've been published in several magazines and periodicals, research papers, books, documentaries, and other systems. So it's done really, really well. The collection is now sitting from that initial 180 to over 2,400 photos.
Wow.
And I actually have 3 more collections here at the house that are in the queue to be scanned. So it's still growing. And if anybody is ever interested in contributing their own or their family members' photos to the collection, please, have them get in touch with me, and we'll find a way to get it done.
Yeah, and I'll link your, I thought I did, but I forgot to do so, your Twitter and your website. I'll link it in the description once we're finished up.
Yep. So now let's just show you, we'll just go through the next couple slides so you can see this collection goes right from the 1930s right through to present day. And some of these photos are that picture there. That is HMCS Acadia behind the submarine, which everybody knows is now sitting at the Naval Museum of Howard, the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic in Halifax. So
another one. I assume that's a wartime photo.
That's a wartime photo. See the cameras in the guy's hands?
Oh, yeah. There's one here on the left.
Yeah, and if you look just to the left of the gangway, the sailor there is holding the ship's mascot.
Yeah.
In his hands. Yeah.
Indeed. A little bit of firepower to back them up.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. But yeah, these photos are, and then post-war, amazing. Yeah. So yeah, anybody, I'll put the link in for sure. But I think if I found yours before, I just Googled your name and it came right up. So
yeah,
if anybody wants to look now. Yeah.
It's the 60s. We're getting magnificent.
Yeah, we're getting aircraft.
Yeah. And that's actually a Sabre on the deck of Magnificent there.
Really? Okay.
Yep, they're transporting them from Germany back to Canada.
Okay, that's how. I was like, wait a second, but yeah, that makes sense. I was doing some work with those. I was looking at some of these today, actually. No, yeah, I'll let you mention it. I was like, that doesn't make sense, but now that makes sense.
Yep.
These photos always get me. Sorry, the transfers.
Oh yes, the Jack State transfers. Yeah.
Not a fan.
Yeah.
Never done it, but not a fan. I'm not a big open ocean fan, I guess. So that makes me a bit nervous.
Yeah. That was a couple of those. That picture there was actually one I took myself back in the 70s. That was the ships in Kingston for the 76 Olympics.
Oh, okay.
Protect the sail teams there.
Yeah.
And the next one, that's actually me on board HMCS Ottawa in 1981.
That's pretty cool.
And
1990s.
Coming up to do a RAS with the AOR there. Another one of my own photos in Halifax.
Yeah.
And Charlottetown passing astern of HMCS Sackville.
Yep. Just the size difference always gets me.
And that's a picture I captured of Toronto.
Right.
I believe it's Toronto. No.
Should be. No?
Yes, Toronto.
Yeah, it should be.
In the St. Lawrence here.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
And today.
And then today, that's a picture I took of Harry DeWolf returning from her circumnavigation this past December. I was fortunate to be there for that very special, very historic event.
Yeah, very much. All right, shall we get into
the topic at hand? So, women serving in the Royal Canadian Navy started with this ship, and this is the steamship Prince George. Belonged to Grand Trunk Railway and was in service just after the turn of the century. And one of the unfortunate things about us is social change does not necessarily come along because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
It usually only comes along because someone has been willing to stand up and say, this is wrong, and very slowly is able to change people's thought processes and get them to realize it. The other way social change comes is through necessity. And this is one of those circumstances where necessity brought about a very dramatic change. So to understand how this ship really fits into the greater scheme of things, we need to talk about another ship. And we'll go to the next slide. This is HMCS Rainbow, one of two cruisers in the Royal Canadian Navy that were brought over from the UK in 1910 when the Canadian Navy was first formed. At the outbreak of World War I, the Canadian Navy still only had the two cruisers, Niobe on the East Coast, Rainbow on the West Coast. And so when war broke out, the only ship protecting Canada's West Coast was Niobe. And Rainbow was at sea. Rainbow was at sea when the skipper received the message that Canada was at war, and his orders were to engage German ships on site. Now, when Rainbow and Niobe came to Canadian Navy, they were already obsolete. So let's go to the next slide.
I still can't believe it. I'm sorry, just quickly, that first time I read that, I went, I get it, but wow, that's a bad idea.
Right.
Such a bad idea. I'd be like, come home. Like, oh, geez.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and this is the ship that they were being pitted up against. Yeah. This is the German modern, newly built cruiser Leipzig.
Yep.
And Leipzig and another German cruiser were actually off the coast of Mexico when the day war was declared. And intelligence reported immediately that Leipzig had turned north to engage Commonwealth shipping off the coast of British Columbia. And so this very impressive cruiser was on its way, and Rainbow was out patrolling looking for it. And the crew, the ship's company, and Rainbow were expected to do their duty. And the message sent to Rainbow when ordered to engage Leipzig basically ended with, the Admiralty expects you to carry out your duties as Nelson would have had you do. And you talk about dropping a bombshell.
Yeah,
right?
No kidding.
So the battle was going to be bloody when it happened. And Naval Service Headquarters and realized, this is not going to go well for Rainbow. And so let's go to the next slide. So Rainbow, with that, Naval Service Headquarters in Ottawa instructed the base of Esquimalt to locate an appropriate ship that can be brought into service very quickly as a hospital ship. And the intent of the hospital ship was to shadow Rainbow as she was out on patrol. And when the battle happened, she would be in the immediate vicinity to pick up and care for any survivors. And that's where Prince George comes in. So Prince George was that ship. Orders were sent to the ship while she was still at sea, and ordering her to set course for Esquimalt immediately. When she arrived at Esquimalt, she was met by a naval party. The senior officer handed papers to the master, basically saying the Royal Canadian Navy is hereby commandeering the ship in service of the King, and all the passengers are to leave. So while the passengers are gathering their effects and leaving by the forward gangway, sailors and dock workers are hauling all sorts of equipment on board in the after gangway. And they're hauling on medical equipment, surgical beds, all that good stuff. And she is literally being transformed into a hospital ship as the passengers are leaving. And in very short order, she was set and ready to get underway. Now, sailors, Canadian naval sailors, were in very limited quantity in Esquimalt at the time. Rainbow had actually left on her patrol with less than a full complement.
Right.
So the few sailors that were left, there wasn't enough for them to provide a ship's company for Prince George.
Right.
So again, the Canadian Navy came up with an idea, and that was, we will leave the ship under the command of her civilian master, and the civilian sailors will work the ship right down to the cooks and the stewards and the deckhands and the stokers and all that. And we will put on a RCN commanding officer and the medical staff and our own communicators, and we will operate a joint civilian RCN mixed crew. Now, what I found interesting about this is when Asterix was brought into service with the RCN a few years ago, there was a big uproar that this was going to be a civilian ship with a civilian crew and an RCN augmentation for the replenishment at sea and supplies, and how this was a really big deal and it had never been done before, and untried and untested, and it's not going to work. Well, it worked in 1914, and guess what? It works today still.
Yeah, at least that's how these things tend to go. There's always an example that we forget. Yeah, it's always happens, especially in Canadian military history. It's always an example we've somehow forgotten.
Yes. So, Prince George was brought into commission with the RCN, and she was commissioned His Majesty's Canadian Hospital Ship, Prince George, HMCHS is the prefix.
Bit of a mouthful.
And when that happened, a number of firsts were immediately brought in. This was the very first Commonwealth hospital ship to enter service in the First World War.
Right.
of all the other nations in the Commonwealth, including the UK. And she is the first and only hospital ship to be commissioned in the Canadian Navy. But one of the more significant firsts on this was she sailed with nurses. So if we can go to the next slide. Now, unfortunately, I've not been able to find a photo of the nurses that served in Prince George.
Right.
But this is a photo of a typical nursing sister's uniform of the time. And the letter in the center is actually signed by Vice Admiral Kingsmill, commander of the RCN. But 6 nurses sailed with Prince George when she left for her war patrol. And that was Miss Elizabeth Pierce, Miss Emma Gertrude Black, Miss Annie Dover, Miss Mabel Ogilvie, Miss Penelope Mellen, and Miss Bessie Watson. And each of these nurses came with some form of experience working in hospitals ashore and volunteered to join Prince George. What is interesting is that letter that's on the page. Mm-hmm. And it's signed by Kingsmill, as I mentioned. The Minister of Naval Service hereby appoints as acting sister of His Majesty's Canadian hospital ship Prince George for war service in hospital ship Prince George. Your appointment is to take effect from the 8th of August, 1914. That letter and the letter for the other 6 women are the first women to be appointed to serve in the Royal Canadian Navy in 1914. And it's interesting that Kingsmill chose to write this letter himself, because with a civilian RCN mixed crew, he actually could have opted to have them signed aboard as civilian nurses.
Right.
He did not have to bring these women into the RCN, and certainly not at that time in history. Women didn't have the right to vote yet. Right. And here he's gone and brought them into the RCN as sailors. So that is a major step, especially in that time frame.
Well, it's amazing. Like you said, wasn't done out of any sort of hope for social change or any push. It was done out of necessity. But what I think is so striking is the date itself, the 8th of August, 1914. That is so absolutely early. Like that is like very early in the First World War, especially as Canada goes. Like that is early.
like I said, women still didn't have the right to vote.
Yeah.
I mean,
they were still getting over the crowd hangover of the cheering when war was declared, and these women are going to war.
Yes.
It's just
in a ship they know is going to go and is looking for battle, and a one-sided battle to boot.
Oh yeah, it would have been.
So one more anecdote on this story, if we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, of course.
So that's Prince George before she sailed. In the rush to get her out to sea, they only managed to paint one side in the hospital colors, which was all white with a green stripe and the red crosses. Yep. And so the other side was still very much black and white. When Prince George rendezvoused with Rainbow out on the Pacific, it was this side of the ship that they saw from Rainbow. Yeah. And if you remember the picture of Leipzig, he has 3 funnels in the center, 2 large masts forward and aft. And Rainbow fortunately closed the contact. Okay. But at action stations with all guns trained on the ship, fortunately they did not open fire and confirm the identity of Prince George. So it could have been a very different outcome at that point too.
Yeah, because here's it in the hospital ship, and then
Yeah.
That's going to create some confusion, particularly in August 1914 on the Pacific, because of what we just talked about. How early it was, how little of the communication, no one knew what was happening. It's a wild time.
Absolutely.
It's
And
great.
radio at that time was in its infancy.
Mm-hmm. Well, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have an interesting question, actually, if you don't mind, Roger.
Yeah.
The suffragettes or other women's groups, was there any objections to the women joining the RCN?
Nothing that I have been able to find. So I'm not saying no, there wasn't. I just have not found anything as of yet. It would also be very interesting to find out just how widespread this was known at the time.
I was going to ask, yeah.
Because there's very little actually documented outside. Like, I have not been able to find newspaper articles or anything of that nature stating the mission of Prince George and the people that were brought into it in the public realm of old newspapers and that. So probably at the time, it really was not well known by anyone outside of the naval circles.
Yeah, that would be my assumption, is there's no reaction because nobody knows.
No.
Well, like you said, it's so slapdash anyway. I mean, there's hardly any time to react, let alone get angry and organized in any way about this.
Right. And Prince George was only kept in service as a commissioned ship for about 28 days. Once the threat of Leipzig passed,
right,
and the Royal Navy, and actually Japan was an ally at the time as well.
Yep.
So a Japanese cruiser came into Esquimalt, followed by some modern Royal Navy cruisers, and Rainbow was no longer required as a primary warship for engagement. Yep. So once the danger to Rainbow passed, Prince George was paid off and returned to Grand Trunk Railway. So
probably for the best for everyone, including Rainbow.
Yes.
Because that just would have been.
And the skipper of Rainbow, because for that 28 days, Prince George literally shadowed everywhere Rainbow went. Prince George was right behind in the hospital colors. And finally, they had just investigated a possible enemy contact up towards Prince Rupert, and they had gone into port. And the skipper of Rainbow came over to Prince George. He says, "Okay, I'm leaving. You're staying. It's too damn demoralizing to my sailors to be followed by you guys with a death wish." And he left Prince George behind.
Yeah, that's not the first time I've heard a story like that, to be honest. Particularly with the hospital ships, that's not the first one I've heard. But yeah, that's not surprising in the slightest in that way, because it is. It's like, yeah, okay, they think something's about to go real bad, that they're prepared for it.
Yeah.
This is
literally it's like being followed by the Gravedigger Battalion.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it would be very demoralizing. That's just so much here.
Let's bring it forward a few more years and go to the next slide.
We shall.
So it would be another 28 years before necessity brought women back into the Royal Canadian Navy. The Second World War was raging. U-boats were hunting in the North Atlantic, sinking ships outside Canadian ports, and even torpedoing ships in the St. Lawrence River.
Yep.
The RCN was growing at an astounding pace. New ships were being built and sent into battle as quickly as they were being finished. Sailors to man these ships were in high demand, and the RCN had to grow from 2,000 sailors at the beginning of the war to over 100,000 sailors were needed. So where do you get these bodies? Well, Navy realized there was an entire pool of people ready and willing to join. And on 31 July 1942, the Women's Royal Canadian Naval Service was established. And the whole purpose and the intent of that was to free male personnel from shore duties so that they could serve at sea.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to the next slide. Now, with the creation of the Women's Royal Canadian Naval Service, the person to command it on the left, Commander Adelaide Sinclair, she was appointed the first director and given the rank of acting captain. And the woman on the right, Lieutenant Commander Isabel McNeil, she was appointed as the commanding officer of HMCS Conestoga, which is a stone frigate.
Stone frigate, yep.
Basically, a stone frigate is any naval establishment that is on shore. Yeah. And HMCS Conestoga was located in Galt, Ontario, and it was the training base for the Wrens. So as the commanding officer of a ship, because a shore establishment is considered a ship, Isabel McNeil was entitled to be piped aboard any ship that she was going to, whether it was a stone frigate or an actual warship.
That's amazing.
And what's neat about that is at that time, on 1 June 1943, when she was appointed, no other woman in the Commonwealth had the right to be piped aboard a ship outside of members of the royal family. And so that's just how integral the role of these two women's played. Both of these women would go on and receive, become members of the Order of the British Empire for the incredible work that she did. They both did.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there real quick, Roger, because I've done some digging, not as much as I'd like. That's the problem with Commander Sinclair, but I'm hoping at some point in the future to do some more digging on her and maybe put something together, just because ever since I read about her for the first time in depth, she's just one of the characters, or sorry, one of the figures of the Canada War that is stuck out in my mind, and such respect for her and everything she did. And then even after the war as well. I mean, she brought that, I don't even know what word, but she just got stuff done, I guess is probably the best way to say it. Yeah. She brought that to also their it was charity work and in the post-war period, which is just amazing to me that she just kept serving.
The post-war accomplishments by these two women equal their wartime accomplishments. Just phenomenal role models for all Canadians. Yeah, completely
agree.
And we really need to know more about them. Yeah,
I agree completely.
So next slide, please.
Oh yeah, these photos are great. Yeah. I love these photos.
So in total, 6,783 women enlisted in the Women's Royal Canadian Naval Service. That's a far cry from the 6 in the First World War. Yeah. They served in 39 different shore-based trades. Over 1,000 were posted overseas. And what's interesting about that word overseas is it means anywhere other than Canada. So today when we think of overseas, we think of going over to Europe and the UK. It also meant being sent to Washington. It also meant being sent to St. John's, Newfoundland.
Yep. Because
St. John's was not part of Canada at that time. So it was an overseas posting. 20 of these Wrens received various degrees of Order of the British Empire. 2 received King's Commendations, and 6 Wrens died in service during the war. So next slide.
Oh, sorry, we got some questions if you don't mind. I think I know these are good questions. So thanks, Laura, again for watching and contributing this great question. I think I know the answer. Do either Sinclair or McNeil have any sort of biography, book, anything written on them?
Yes, they do. If you do a search online, you will find additional information. I believe Canadian Encyclopedia.
But they don't have a
has some
book or like a
information on them as
biography or
well.
anything, do they?
Pardon me?
They don't have like a biography or anything, do they?
A written book biography? I don't know. I wouldn't be able to answer that at this time.
Yeah, but I know there is.
know.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
The Naval Museum of Halifax is developing a new permanent display in the museum there dedicated to women. And awesome. These two women will be featured in that display as well.
Oh, that's great.
So,
yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, so I think that's your answer, Lorelei, for now, or anyone who's interested to do a little more digging. There is stuff online, but there's no, as far as I know as well, I can't say for sure, because I've dug, but not very deep. I don't think so. Yeah. But there are resources. They're just not to like book length projects that I'm aware of anyway. Yeah. So this is a good question from Scott, another great supporter of the channel. And I'm sure you know Scott. He's everywhere. It's a good question. Why did the ERCN wait so long when the Royal Navy had already been doing this?
That I can't answer with any amount of certainty, other than it was probably one of those things of necessity. It wasn't necessary.
Right.
The RCN went through a huge reduction post-World War I. Canadian government reduced the budget of the RCN by a full third. And the commander at the time, Walter Hose, literally paid off all the ships but two, closed most of the shore facilities to keep the Navy afloat, reduced the regular RCN to just a few hundred sailors, and formed the Royal Canadian Naval Reserve and Royal Canadian Navy Naval Volunteer Reserve with units across the country. And so there was no money, and even the male sailors in the RCN were being let go and new recruits were being turned away.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until the 30s that their numbers started to come up again. But at 1939, when war broke out, we still only had 6 destroyers, a handful of minesweepers, and only 2,000 sailors in the entire RCN. So the RCN between the wars.
Sorry to jump it again, but that number just always boggles my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I know now why that happened. Yeah. I think I've got a pretty good handle on why, because I've done a little bit of research, say, on Canada in the Second World War. I think just a little bit. I get why, but it's just still, to me, it's just such a shocking number because of Canada's position. I get the argument. The Royal Navy, and I get it. Again, I've heard it all from the historical figures themselves, writing it down. But to me, it's still mind-boggling. But then again, I'm sorry, this is jumping ahead a little bit, but what the Royal Canadian Navy was able to do and expand like they did is another one of the great stories of the war that is not told.
Well, and World War II wasn't the first expansion. World War I, they went from those 2 cruisers to 145 ships by the end of World War I.
Yep.
And unfortunately, we have not learned from history.
No, well, we'll leave it at that because we could talk about that for another 3 hours. But yeah, you're right. I mean, to me, sorry just to jump in there, but I think it's just it's fascinating.
No, I agree.
Yeah, so there we go. That's great.
Okay, so next slide then.
Oh yeah, right. Sorry about that.
So these are 2 of the Wrens. Both were nurses. On 14 October, they were aboard the Cape Breton ferry SS Caribou when she was torpedoed by U-69 in the Cabot Strait. 137 people were killed on the ferry. And Sub-Lieutenant Margaret Brooke on the right and Sub-Lieutenant Agnes Wilkie both survived the initial torpedoing and went into the water. And they were on their way to Newfoundland for their overseas posting. The 2 managed to cling to an overturned lifeboat, but in the cold, Sub-Lieutenant Wilkie became unconscious. And Sub-Lieutenant Brooke then held on to her sister nurse and with one hand while still clinging to the overturned lifeboat with the other, and spent a good part of the time waiting for rescue, trying to support Sub-Lieutenant Wilkie. Unfortunately, cold and weather and waves, a large wave came along and ripped Wilkie out of Brooke's hands, and she was carried away, and Sub-Lieutenant Agnes Wilkie eventually died. And she became the first of the Women's Royal Canadian Naval Service to be lost in action with the enemy. Later on 1 January 1943, Margaret Brooke was awarded a Member of the Order of the British Empire for her actions during that night. And the citation read, "For gallantry and courage after the sinking of the Newfoundland ferry SS Caribou. This officer displayed great courage whilst in the water in attempting to save the life of another nursing sister." And in honor of the courage of Sub-Lieutenant Margaret Brooke, the second Arctic and Offshore Patrol ship will be named in her honor. And magnificent ship. That's a picture I took of her just a little over a month ago, the ship.
Yeah, these are those are always great to see when you post those pictures, and seeing the new ships it's amazing to see them, and hope I get to see it up close at some point in my life sometime.
And the ship's badge for Margaret Brooke reflects the courage and heroism of Margaret Brooke, the nurse. There's a lot of heraldry in that badge that is really quite wonderful. Okay, so can we go to the next slide?
We can.
Now, this I include because it brings us back to the necessity in changing social outcomes. This was an advertisement I found in a newspaper when I was researching another project on shipboard or ship construction here in Canada. And specifically about the tugboats that were built here in Trenton, Ontario during the war.
Right.
And they were built by a bridge company. They weren't by a shipyard. It was a company that built bridges, built 150 tugboats.
Of course it was.
Yeah. And that's how desperate we were for shipbuilding. So I was reading an article, an interview of the owner of the shipbuilding company. And in there, he's talking about, what they had to do to get up to speed and design these tugboats, and never having built a ship before. And, we got a contract for 150, and how are we going to do it? We don't have the manpower. And then it quotes him and says, "We did something we never, ever thought we would have to do. We hired women." And this ad for women was in the same paper. And it really talks about necessity bringing social change. The unfortunate part about this is all these women during the Second World War, they joined the Navy, they joined the Air Force, they joined the Army, they went to the factories, they went to the industries, they went into the mines and the forests. And at the end of the war, they were all sent home to take up their duties as homemaker, wife, and raise children with no more expectations of regaining that change, which is really wrong. It was wrong then. It was acceptable then, but it was still wrong.
Still wrong. Very much wrong. I mean, it's just, sorry, again, just jump in, but I think it's one of the, how do I say this? It's one of those changes that's brought about by war that it does have a lasting impact, right? Because that's what it helps to fuel women's rights movements in North America, especially. But just the short-sightedness and outright stupidity of first A saying, "Oh, we had to hire women." Oh no, like yeah, like you had already said, that had already happened in the First World War. Like that had
That's
already
right.
happened in all kinds of industries in Canada. Anyway, but then just to rely on these women and who do this work in some cases a lot better than a lot of men, and then just send them off, literally fire them, cut them out of service. Like it's one of the things of the war that is just. It's one of the negative legacies, is all I can say. It's unfortunate.
Yep. So let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, there's my rant. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah. So we didn't have to wait 28 more years for social change to come.
Yeah.
So in 1951, the RCN started to realize, Canada was at war in Korea. Manpower was down once again, and the Canadian government passed that women could join the Canadian Naval Reserve. But they were limited to about 500 women in the entire country.
Yep.
So that was 24 April 1951. And these are some of the first women to sign up as new recruits at HMCS York in Ontario. The advantage was because it had only been a few years after the end of the Second World War. You see the lady on the left, they still had available to them experienced RCNS officers and senior hands to train and teach these women when they did come on board with the Naval Reserve units. So, and many of the Wrens from the Second World War re-enlisted when it was open to the reserves.
Mm-hmm.
What is unique is they were not brought in at that time as a separate service.
Right.
They were brought in as members of the Royal Canadian Navy Reserve. So let's go to the next one.
It only took 40 years, but they finally learned their bloody lesson.
Yeah. Yep.
I swear.
So next slide. And a few years after that, in the 24 April 1955, the first course of Wrens, still called Wrens, but they were brought into the Royal Canadian Navy regular force.
Yep.
And this is the first class at HMCS Cornwallis in Nova Scotia. And they took up positions as storesmen or storeswomen, pay and administrative writers, medical assistants, naval airwomen, harborcraft operators, communicators, general duty, radio technicians, electrical technicians, and for maintenance and inspection duties in the ordnance branch. But again, all shore postings. Right.
Yep.
So, but now it's permanent. There'll be no more of this going back and forth. We'll use you when we need you. Other than that, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, women have finally taken their place within the Royal Canadian Navy and are there to stay.
Yep.
So let's
way longer than it should have.
Yeah.
Way longer.
And the next slide. So this is HMCS Cormorant. In 1980, the Navy began trials of mixed gender ships companies in auxiliary vessels. And Cormorant was a dive tender complete with submersibles. And it was part of what was called the Swinter Project, which is service women in non-traditional environments and roles. And what is interesting is this is the first time in 66 years that women were able to go to sea in a Canadian Navy ship from 1914 to 1980. And 25 years after women were brought into the regular Canadian Navy. Next slide.
Oh, yeah, sorry, just real quick here. We have a comment that pretty much hits the nail on the head there. So I don't know what more to say other than
Yep. So 1983, Commander Lorraine Francis Orthlade, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, and I apologize, took command of the Naval Reserve Unit in Calgary, HMCS Tecumseh. And she became the first woman to command a Naval Reserve Unit and the first woman to command a stone frigate since Lieutenant Commander Isabel had command of HMCS Conestoga in World War II. And next slide. And this is HMCS Nipigon. She's one of the Cadillac destroyers that was built in the 50s.
Right.
And on 16 February 1999, she returned to the fleet from a refit where accommodations had been built into the ship, finally, for a mixed gender ship's company in a combatant ship. And this marks the first time that women were able to fill positions in a combat ship at sea. And a lot of that came about, again, because of necessity. In the 80s and 90s, manpower, budget cuts, everything else, very, very often a ship would return from a deployment to Halifax or Esquimalt. And when they got there, orders would be set for a number of the sailors that were serving in the ship and just returning home for them to go and immediately join another ship that was departing on a different deployment. And they were called pierhead jumps.
Yeah.
And where you get off one ship and immediately go back to sea on another. So to alleviate some of that pressure and bring some more bodies into bunks on board the ships, they started opening up the combatant ships to women in 1990. So next slide. So this is, in 2001, the Minister of National Defense announced that service aboard the Victoria-class submarines would become available to women. And marking the first time that women were able to serve in submarines in the Canadian Navy. The old subs, the Oberons, the O classes,
right.
Could not be refitted to accommodate women, whereas the new Victorias could, separate gender accommodations could be made in them. And the first sailor to complete the submariner's course was Master Seaman Colleen Beattie. This photo I got from her LinkedIn. I've been unable to find a photo of her serving in the RCN, which is really quite unfortunate. This is a major milestone. And it marks the first time that all positions in the RCN were finally open to women. Next slide.
Only took what that's what for years. What that's 90 years of RCN history. I know we keep doing the math on this, but it's just so stupid.
That picture there, I took myself when I was in Esquimalt in 2016.
Yeah, it's a great photo. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites of all time.
Yeah, you could definitely sell that one. People would buy that for sure.
Okay, so this is HMCS Kingston, one of the Kingston class maritime coastal defense vessels. In 11 July 2003, Lieutenant Commander Marta Mulkins, in the top right corner there, became the first woman to serve as a commanding officer of a Canadian minor warship. And the MCDVs are considered minor warships. Marking the first time that a woman had command of a ship at sea, not just a ship on land.
Right.
Next slide. In 2007, Commodore, at the time, Jennifer Benet, became the first female commander of the Naval Reserve and the first woman to command a naval formation. Now, Naval Reserve is not a seagoing, because none of the Naval Reserve units can leave their cities, the buildings at least. The sailors certainly go to sea.
Yes.
So it's a naval formation that is tied to the land. Yeah. In 2011, Commodore Benet was promoted to Rear Admiral and was the first person to command the Chief of Reserves and Cadets, the highest position in the Reserve Force, Canadian Navy Reserve. And so next slide. On 6 April 2009, Commander Josie Kurtz became the first female to command a major warship when she took over command of HMCS Halifax. And under her command, Halifax was quite busy taking part in humanitarian operations in Haiti and several other missions throughout the world.
This is the timeline where I start remembering things in the news. I remember things. This is good.
So let's go to the next slide. Again, this is Josie Kurtz, promoted to Commodore, and she assumed command of Standing NATO Group 2 in 15 June 2019. And Standing NATO Group 2, for those that don't know, is a large fleet of NATO ships made of several NATO countries, high readiness maritime force. And Commodore Kurtz was the first woman to command a NATO fleet and the first woman to command a fleet in the RCN. And that term lasted 6 months. She has now and is currently Commandant of the Royal Military College in Canada. And again, was the first woman Commandant of RMC.
Right.
So let's go on to the next slide. So I'm going to leave you with the words from Rear Admiral Benet. Women were nurses even in the Northwest Rebellion. Nurses were on the front lines and they did incredible things. Women rose to the occasion and we stand on the shoulders of these women. And the legacy of women in the RCN is the history is still not fully written yet. There's still a lot more that has to happen before it's a full and proper integration. But fortunately today, those social changes are not necessarily being driven by necessity as they were in the past. Today, it's being driven more because, one, it's the right thing to do, and two, they're realizing there are a lot of people out there that have the ability and can do the job well, and it doesn't matter whether they're male, female, religion, orientation. It's changing, right? But there's still room to go.
Unfortunately, that is the case. There's still lots of work to be done and lots of change to be made, but things are hopefully not going on a limb, but are moving that direction, hopefully, finally. Again, I don't want to go into that too much right now just because of what we're trying to focus on, but there's things that still need to be changed. So we had a question I did want to get back to it at the end, if that's all right. So let me find it here.
Yeah.
If I can't find it, I think I remember it well enough. I always remember it. Oh, here we go. Found out actually easily for once, the first time ever on a live stream from Lorelai again. So going way back to kind of what, focused this talk today. after the service of those nurses on the Prince George, is there any details about what they did in the war or anything about them or anything like that?
There's not a lot of details, but several of them did eventually join the Canadian Army Medical Corps for service after Prince George. And but again, it's women's history was not recorded as much at that time.
Right.
So it is difficult. I'm still digging. I'm still hoping to find more. I would absolutely love to find photos of these 6 women serving aboard the hospital ship. I think that is an important visual record that if it's out there, it has got to be found.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And hopefully in some way this gets to someone who might know somebody who might know something or something. I don't know. That's what I hope to do sometimes when I do these things, is that's part of it, is who knows what, so hopefully something.
Well, and it could be tucked in a photo album in somebody's attic that, they have no idea. Right.
Yeah. I've heard these are all these kinds of crazy stories how things come out of the woodwork, especially when you least suspect them or for where you least suspect them to come from. So I don't think I missed any questions. If I did, I apologize, everyone. I think that's it. Yeah. So this was a great talk. Thanks, Roger. I really appreciate you coming on and
been a lot of fun
about this. Yeah. So I will share, I said this before, but just to reiterate, I will link Roger's website, Twitter. He did work on the 6 nurses, the 6 women who served on Prince George. I will link that as well. I thought he did. Sometimes the software, or I don't hit save, or something happens and things don't go the way I planned. And today was very busy, so things got away from me. But I will remedy that and fix that right now. But I think that's it. So thanks again, Roger. Thanks for coming on. Did you enjoy coming on?
Well, thank you, and thank you everybody for joining us. It certainly has been a good evening, and really appreciate everybody that's interested in our naval history.
Yeah, and hopefully this can get somebody somewhere, kickstarting something, and somebody interested in doing research on this, taking it up as a hobby themselves. Who knows? Because this is, like you said, an area, the history is not being done nearly as to what it should be, and there's also change that needs to be made. And I think history is one of the paths that can help change things and change perspectives. So I think that, and I thank you for doing this research and kind of helping in that area. It's great. So I'm just gonna do a sign off, and I'll come say bye to you, Roger, and then we'll call it good night. All right.
Yep.
Perfect. So thanks again, everyone, for watching. Really appreciate you guys coming out tonight and watching. Thanks for the great questions and all the great comments and questions and everything. It's always great to see that on the sidebar and get everyone involved in everything. So thanks again. And thanks to Roger for coming on. Tomorrow, the show will be at the same time, 7 p.m. Eastern. I have Kelly Thompson coming on, talking about her book and her experience serving in the Canadian Forces. I'm really excited for that one. It's going to be a really, really good show. So make sure to come and watch that one at the same time tomorrow. Again, if you like the stuff and you're new here, please like the channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave comments below. That helps me immensely to keep this to other people to see it. So thanks again. And if you're a supporter and want to keep seeing this kind of thing, please check out the Patreon. I'm at 40 right now. It's great to have that much support, but every person I get helps me continue to do this. So any support you can give through Patreon would be fantastic. So check that out. Everything's linked below, and I will get those links cleaned up and ready to go as soon as this is finished, so everybody can check that out. But again, you can easily Google Roger and stuff will come right up. No problem. He's got a great website, so do check it out. It's another great one. Hey, Roger, I'm seeing a last name I'm recognizing here. We got
that's my dad.
Awesome. That is amazing.
Hi, Dad.
Well, thanks, Jerry. Hey, well, thanks for joining us, Jerry. Appreciate that. You popping in and leaving a comment. That is greatly appreciated. Let's go. Hey, you got a fan club that follows you around. How does that feel?
I have 2 supporters, my wife and my dad, and I'm good.
Well, you're going to have more than that now, whether you want it or not. You got the OTD crowd now knows about what you're doing and is definitely going to be watching you. And like we were talking before, we'll for sure get you back on. We'll talk about, you got something in the works that I can't say it sounds really cool, but I won't say.
Also,
that builds
a little on the cold side.
Yeah. It builds suspense. So that's also
But we're
why I like
breaking
doing
ice with it.
Yeah. That's one way to put it. Don't say anymore. You're going to give it too much away. Anyway, so we'll definitely have Roger will come back if he wants. And I think he does. And I definitely want him back. So I will coerce him into coming back, even if he doesn't want to. But thanks everyone again. And I'll see you tomorrow. See you, everybody.